Everyone, and welcome to the Healthy Air, Land, and Water Research Seminar this morning. I'm going to hand things over to Elena Irwin, the Director of the Sustainability Institute at OSU, to get things started and kick things off. Morning, Elena.
Good morning, Jay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to kick things off. Super excited to have the seminar and hear from our panelists, as well as have a robust discussion on how to win, develop, and execute interdisciplinary research grants for research. This is a seminar hosted by Jay Martin and Linda Weavers, our two research faculty leaders for the Healthy Air, Land, and Water program focus area of the Sustainability Institute. I just want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about the mission of the Sustainability Institute, and then I will turn it back over to Jay and Linda to get us started with the panel discussion. I think, as many of you know who are affiliated with the Institute in one way or another, the Sustainability Institute integrates sustainability and resilience scholarship and activities really across the university mission: research, teaching, campus engagement, external partners, and community outreach. We have a small but mighty staff that supports these activities. I am the faculty director for the Institute. I have an appointment in the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences. I'm an environmental economist by training. And along with Kate Barter, who's the executive director for the Institute, we co-direct the Institute together. But the Institute really is comprised of a lot of faculty leadership as well. In addition to Jay and Linda, who are the research leaders for the Healthy Air, Land, and Water area, we have other faculty leaders in the sustainable energy area, Jeff Galecki and Dave Cole, as well as in the Smart and Resilient Communities area, Usha Akar and Stephen Quiring. We also have two other research focus areas: circular economy and sustainable resources, in which we are helping to cultivate research development. We have 31 awesome core faculty who are affiliated with the Institute through the Discovery Themes Initiative, and about 300 faculty overall and researchers who are affiliated with the Institute. We do a lot to provide opportunities to support faculty in students and research and other sustainability related activities. Just a couple things to mention with respect to that. One of the things we've got going on right now is a call for proposals for ideas for exploratory research groups, which is a new initiative that we've launched to build collaborative communities of researchers on topics that are faculty driven at the forefront of sustainability and resilience challenges. So we'll be forming these so-called ERGs, exploratory research groups, over the next couple of weeks, and launching them, and then having a open call for people to join those going into the summer and into the fall. We've also done some similar work with an initiative that we called Rebuild, Renew, and Reshape, which was an initiative to look at the recovery from COVID-19 and asking questions about how can we build back in better ways towards a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable community and society. Another thing I'll mention, we do also support curriculum development. We've got an RFP coming out soon to support new curriculum development ideas. We've done this once before. This is at the undergraduate level, and we're able to support some really exciting new development in a new major, as well as new minors and certificate programs. So if that's something that is of interest to you, be on the lookout for that in the next few months. Or where we also help to manage the Ohio State Sustainability Fund, which is a fund that supports campus sustainability efforts, and in particular ties to research and teaching using our campus as a living lab. As I said, today's event is part of our Healthy Air, Land, and Water research program area led by Linda Weavers.
Linda, maybe that's good. No, dude.
And Jay Martin, Ohio. Whoops, I'm sorry, I just got dropped. I'm back now. I was just in the process of introducing Linda and Jay. Linda is an endowed chair and professor in the Department of Civil, Environmental, and Geodetic Engineering here at OSU. Also just recently named Distinguished Professor at Ohio State. She also co-directs the Ohio Water Resources Center. And Jay is a professor of ecological engineering in the Department of Food, Agricultural, and Biological Engineering, focuses on natural systems and interactions with human systems. I've had the great pleasure of collaborating with both Linda and Jay over the years, and I can tell you they are tremendous faculty in their leadership and in their experiences that they bring to doing interdisciplinary research. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. And I'll turn it back over to Jay at this point.
Okay, thank you so much, Elena, for the introduction and getting things started this morning. I really appreciate it. And thanks to Linda for joining us. I enjoy serving as co-lead for Healthy Air, Land, and Water Research with Linda. And Linda's going to join at the end of today's seminar and wrap things up and look at some next steps. And I'll have her mention a few more things then at the end of today's gathering. So healthy air, land, and water research, that could really include a lot of things. So what I'd like to do in the next few moments, because this is the first kind of public unveiling about what we're trying to do with healthy air, land, and water research at OSU, is talk about some of the specific steps that we want to take. Then after that, I will introduce our panelists and we'll get started probably in about 10 minutes with questions and answers focused on interdisciplinary grants. But first, a few bits and pieces about healthy air, land, and water research. We have 4 initiatives. I'm going to talk about the first 2 initially. Those are cultivate and coordinate innovative research, and secondly, to build financial resources and university industrial partnerships. So most of this focuses on research. A couple of the steps we're taking right now, as Elena mentioned, we're focused on developing exploratory research groups. So there we're looking for groups of faculty to come together around ideas, or it could be general ideas, or it could be specific RFPs that they want to pursue. And myself, Linda, and others within the Sustainability Institute will provide resources, coordination, linkages to other faculty to support those groups as they move forward and develop research ideas or specific grants. In addition to that, we have supported a number of recent grant submissions. These have been large interdisciplinary grants. A couple examples are the NSF Coastlines and People. We're working with a couple of sustainable agricultural systems grants right now that'll be submitted very shortly to the USDA program. We're also reaching out to individual faculty and working with them as they develop grants for programs like NSF DICES and things like that. So if you have ideas for research ideas in general or grants, please let us know if they're related to healthy air, land, and water research, and we'd be happy to work with you to develop those ideas. Another general goal that we have is to promote internal inclusivity and community at OSU. And there's a couple of steps we're taking in that regard. Linda has been leading a group to develop a website, which is going to be focused on water right now. So focused on water research at OSU. The goals of this website are to provide a platform, one, that people external OSU can see what we're doing with water, and it can be a landing spot for people interested in water at OSU, either internal or external. We can also list grants and develop grant activities. This could be a spot for students to find classes related to water. So we're trying to develop kind of a water landing page at OSU. Another thing we want to do, and we are doing here, is developing a kind of central clearinghouse for seminars related to healthy air, land, and water at Ohio State. We know that many departments, centers, schools have their own seminars that are related to healthy air, land, and water systems. And if you go to the SI webpage, go to the How W link, you can find out where we're listing these seminars. So if you have seminars related to healthy air, land, and water research, please let us know, and we can list them on the site, and it can be a place where we can all come together and find seminars that we're interested in. Lastly, related to inclusivity and community, I want to talk about a gathering that Linda and I have on the first Thursday of every month that we call Flow and Terroir. Flow and Terroir, flow is obviously related to healthy air, land, and water systems. Terroir is a French word that means the area and climate around which wine was grown. So we wanted to have something that noted air, land, and water systems. And this is a gathering we have, and we talk about different topics related to How W. On the 1st of April, we're having a session devoted to looking at upcoming RFPs and grant opportunities and developing teams. So once a semester, we're going to focus on that. So if you do have time, please join us on April 1st for that. You can also visit the SI webpage to see about upcoming topics. This is a fairly informal gathering. We welcome you to bring beverages or snacks. It's from 4:30 to 5:30, first Thursday of every month. The last objective or overall objective we have for a healthy air, land, and water research is to increase external awareness and reputation. A couple of the things we're doing here recently, Linda led a spokesperson training, and I can't remember the organization that hosted that, but it was very successful. I think we had about 15 folks from OSU, and that should help us as we interact with legislatures and politicians and try to promote our research to a wider audience. We're also trying to increase our coordination with government affairs as we interact with federal and state policymakers. So we're reaching out to government affairs people in different colleges and at the university, so we can have a better connection with our federal representatives and state representatives, and perhaps downstream grant opportunities that are coming out of DC or know about them before we usually do. So those are some of the objectives we're focused on for healthy air, land, and water research. Going back to the first part, I talked a lot about grants. We have a big focus on the interdisciplinary grants. And so that's really the goal of the session today, is to convene some experts that have a great track record in developing and executing interdisciplinary grants, and learn from them and ask some questions as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and begin to introduce today's panelist. And I'm going to start with our external representatives. And so I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Pedro Alvarez. He is a professor of civil and environmental engineering at Rice University. There he currently leads 2 interdisciplinary programs. So for each of the speakers, I'm going to give them a brief intro and then ask them to speak a little bit more about themselves. I will highlight some of their interdisciplinary expertise as I introduce them. So Pedro is a founding director of an NSF-sponsored engineering research center for nanotechnology and enabled water treatment. This is a multi-university and multidisciplinary innovation ecosystem that is enabling affordable access to clean water by developing next generation, easy to deploy treatment systems empowered by nanotechnology, which taps unconventional water sources and is used to treat or reuse industrial wastewaters. At Rice University, Pedro also serves as the lead for the Superfund Center with the Baylor College of Medicine, which is another multidisciplinary collaboration of Pedro's. So with that, Pedro, I'm going to ask you to say a few more words about yourself, and then if you could wrap things up by focusing on an important lesson that you've learned or a major challenge that you've faced related to interdisciplinary research, I'd appreciate it. Thank you for joining us today, Pedro. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jay, for that kind introduction, and thank you, Linda, for this prestigious invitation. I'm very happy to be here. Yes, I am an environmental engineer. I'm a professor at the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering with joint appointments in chemistry, in chemical engineering, and also in material science and nanoengineering. And over the years, I have been committed to environmental protection and also to help build a more circular, more sustainable, and climate neutral economy. using both biotechnology and nanotechnology. And I have been very lucky and fortunate to receive many research recognitions, including the Clark Prize for Outstanding Research in Water Science and Technology, and also being elected to the National Academy of Engineering for pedagogical and practical contributions to bioremediation and to environmental nanotechnology. And I'll be happy to share with you some perspectives about building these interdisciplinary large centers. The first thing I learned a while ago is that leadership is taken. It's not given. It's not like you're gonna say to somebody, "Oh, you should lead this effort," and whatever. So I would encourage you to size your opportunities and don't let the fear of failure stop you. And more importantly, one of the first steps you need to do is to develop a vision, a vision that is compelling for both intellectual and practical reasons. And this vision, especially when it has a high social impact, is going to be the main magnet that attracts multidisciplinary talent, and also the main glue that keeps these collaborators together. And here you need to strive to be a bold, visionary realist, in the sense that the vision has to be credible, it has to be distinctive, and it has to also have a high impact. Of course, for deep commitment, you need to align your collective passions with your vocations, and pick your players, the team, pick them after you pick the vision. Because a common mistakes that I have, in other words, you need to figure out what are the skills that you need and the talent, and then you go out and pick the players, as opposed to a common mistake I used to make, which is, all right, these are the friends that I have convenient access to, these are the stars that I want to work with, let's see what we can do together. That usually doesn't work as well. And that may mean that you may have to consider some key hires or new partnerships outside of your common realm. It is very important up front that you understand where are the most fertile grounds for your efforts and where is the correct side of the decimal point here. Where can you move the needle? Don't just do science for the sake of science, I think. It has to be, again, intellectually compelling, but also it has to have a benefit to society, I think, so that, and I say this because pushing research and ideas and technologies is a lot easier when you also have pull, right? Whether it is societal pull or industrial pull, we can only push to a certain level. I think that some modifications to the academic reward system need to be considered to encourage this high risk, high impact scholarship and entrepreneurship. Like perhaps consider some temporary teaching releases, as well as providing staff support for developing large multidisciplinary proposals, which takes a lot of work. And overall, let me end with this. I think that we need to aspire to go beyond the creation and dissemination of knowledge, which we do well, to broadly enhance human capacity. We need to consider also the development of these multidisciplinary innovation ecosystems that also serve as economic engines. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Pedro. Appreciate that insight. And thanks again for joining us from Rice today. Before I introduce Robin Wilson, I want to mention one important logistical item going forward, and that is we will have a question and answer session that I will moderate after we move through the introductions. But after that, we will take questions from the audience. So during the next half hour or so, we invite you to submit your questions via chat. And Linda is going to look at those questions. And then after we conclude the question and answer session that I will moderate, we'll reach out to those of you who have submitted questions on chat. And if you would like to, you can turn on your video and ask your question to the panelist. Okay, so with that, I do want to move forward with the introduction of Dr. Robin Wilson. I've had the privilege of working with Robin for probably at least 15 years at Ohio State, and we've done some excellent interdisciplinary research together, often focused on water quality and agricultural decision-making. I'm going to highlight a couple of the grants that Robin has been involved with and led in the last few years. One of these is with National Institutes of Food and Agriculture, and it's entitled Building a Sustainable and Resilient Agroecosystem Through an Understanding of Climate and Farmer Behavior Variability. Robin is also co-PI in another NEFA grant focused on water quality and farmer decision-making that I'm leading. And Robin and I are both serving currently as co-PIs on a food, energy, and water systems grant infused from NSF, and that's entitled Integrated Modeling of Regional Food, Energy, and Water Systems. So I hope you get the idea that Robin's very interested in risk analysis and decision scientists. In fact, she's a professor of risk analysis and decision scientist within the School of Environment and Natural Resources at Ohio State University. So Robin, I'm going to hand it over to you if you'd like to say a few more words about yourself, and then wrap things up with a key insight or lesson that you've learned about interdisciplinary grants. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jay. We have too many projects listening to you talk through that right now. So I'm a behavioral decision scientist. I'm in the School of Environment and Natural Resources, and I guess I come to kind of team science and interdisciplinary work naturally because my kind of educational training over time has been very multidisciplinary. So I haven't decided yet if that's a good or a bad thing from a professional standpoint now as an academic, but I started out with an undergraduate degree in environmental studies with a focus on wildlife ecology, got very interested in human dimensions, and then so for grad school was kind of looking for programs that would mix those perspectives together and bring both ecology and some aspect of the human system into the program of study. And I ended up through a convoluted process working with a decision scientist, getting a degree in environment and natural resources management, and my committees being a mix of ecologists, economists, psychologists. So I've kind of had a history of thinking about things in that way. And again, I think that can be a good thing and a bad thing, you know, in terms of breadth versus depth, which is always a challenge for those of us kind of working in the space. But so I guess it's kind of been ingrained in me to think about things in that way. And so I've just really made a career out of bringing this perspective around decision-making under risk and uncertainty, which pulls kind of theoretically on judgment and decision-making research, which is kind of a subfield in psychology or cognitive psychology, but also behavioral economics, which is a kind of growing field, kind of shifting the traditional economic perspective. And so I've just really made a career out of working on teams like Jay described, bringing that perspective, trying to bring greater, more nuanced understanding of human behavior and individual decision-making into the way that we model coupled systems or the way we think about the impacts of humans on natural systems. So that's the kind of space I'm working in. A lot of it is very focused these days on climate adaptation, how individuals are dealing with climate exacerbated hazards. So I have the water quality work, or largely kind of private lands conservation and water quality focused work that Jay described, but I still also work in the space of wildfire and forest management with a lot of collaborators in the Forest Service. So that's kind of the space I'm in. I think in terms of lessons that I've learned, the first thing that always comes to mind when I'm asked that question is just the time that it takes to do this well. I have moments where I think, man, it'd be really nice just to write a proposal by myself, where I just get to do what I want to do, and I could do it much more quickly. Not only write the proposal more quickly, but do the work much more quickly. So I have moments where that sounds like a good idea, but I think in, you know, the teams that Jay described, it's taken us a long time to get to the point where we've been able to be successfully funded multiple times and to be working on these multiple projects together right now. It's the time to get familiar with your teammates, with their science, with their methods. It's the time it takes to develop a common language. And all of that is needed to then really develop a truly integrated proposal. And even a truly integrated proposal is going to take a lot more time to put together than something you might be able to sit down and do on your own, or perhaps with you know, other scholars from your disciplinary perspective. So I think people have to recognize that that's just one of the challenges that comes along with this, and you have to build that time into your process. So you can't kind of overlook that sort of commitment that has to go into it, which has long-reaching effects, which is part of why sometimes we tell assistant professors, maybe don't do this quite yet. Focus on the things that maybe might return some rewards more quickly, Because when you think about the time it takes to get a proposal funded, you might go through several iterations. You finally get that proposal funded. It's a 3-year project, but you ask for 1 or 2 no cost extensions because it just takes a while to integrate all of that. And then by the time those papers come out, right, you're past tenure. So I think that is something that people have to kind of think about, is that it's a commitment to really do it well and to get to those final products that you might want to see. And so you have to think carefully about when's the right time in your career, I think, to pursue those options. But once you've put in that time, and I think the projects Jay described are a good example of that, there's a core group of us on all 3 of those projects that once you figure that out, once you've developed the language, you understand what each other is doing, you figure out how to integrate it very thoughtfully and not just do parallel work. Once you figure that out, then it becomes a lot easier. You can write the proposals more quickly. You can solve the kind of interdisciplinary science problems more quickly when those projects start. And so there's an advantage then. So once you've committed that time to trying to work with that, continue to work with that team and keep thinking about what's the next set of questions we can answer. What's the next kind of frontier we can push, building on what we've already done and that kind of, I guess, social capital that we've already built. So I think that's just an important piece that's become pretty clear to me over time. I thought I would share.
Great, thank you, Robin, appreciate that. Now I'm going to move forward and introduce Dr. Barry Lyons. Barry is a professor and biogeochemist with the School of Earth Sciences at Ohio State. In the past, Barry has served as the lead investigator of the McMurdo Dry Valley's long-term ecological research program. This is one of only 2 Antarctic LTER sites funded by NSF. So those of you who know a few things about LTER know that they are known for, among other things, for interdisciplinary work. He's also a U.S. representative on the Geosciences Scientific Group of the Science Committee for Antarctic Research. He's also the former director of the School of Earth Sciences and the Bird Polar Climate Research Center at OSU. And at a national level, he has served as chair of NSF's Office of Polar Programs Advisory Committee. So a long track record with polar research Barry brings to us. So Barry, I'll hand things over to you to add more to your intro and talk about a lesson you've learned or a key insight related to interdisciplinary research. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jay, and thank you, Jay and Linda, for asking me to do this. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about interdisciplinary research. So as Jay pointed out, I'm involved, I have been involved for a very long time with McMurdo Dry Valley's LTER project. The location is 78 degrees south latitude. And as I think most of you realize, with the name ecological in there, these projects are really driven by the study of the ecosystem as a whole. So I was the lead PI for about 9 years of this project and was involved with it for 24 years. And it was mostly a group of ecologists and microbial geneticists, as well as just a few physical scientists. I'm a geochemist by background, so my group was involved with mainly with the geochemical part. We also had a glaciologist involved and a hydrologist involved, but most of the folks were biologists. So as Robin just pointed out, time was of an important consideration. It took us a number of years to kind of all integrate in terms of what our language was, what our culture was, what our interest was, what tools we had to use to solve these interdisciplinary problems. So the whole experience was a learning one, particularly the first 4 or 5 years. And so I think that the point Robin made is a really good one. It is a time investment in order to be successful over the long term. The other thing that I'll add to what's been stated by Pedro and Robin is I think recruitment, as Pedro pointed out, is really the key to having success. And it's not just recruiting good academics or good researchers. When Jay and Linda asked me to do this, I thought long and hard about some of the things that I learned in my 24 years working with this group of mainly biologists, as I mentioned. And I even asked them, there were 5 of us in the group that have worked together for that whole period of time. And I asked them for their perspective. And so I got some feedback from them. I also went and looked at the literature, and you won't be surprised to know there is a literature on what breeds success in interdisciplinarity and interdisciplinary projects. And I found a paper by Manzilla et al. In 2012, and they actually did an empirical study. They looked at successful interdisciplinary projects, and they coined the term, I think they coined it, it's called socio-interactional dimensions. And I think that kind of sums up the point I want to make, what I learned. It's more than just having a good scientist or a good economist or whatever group you're working with, but you want someone who is just not interested in their own expertise. You want someone who has a personal style of collegiality, of collaboration, someone who can think about issues that are not in their own area of expertise. And that sounds almost as a cliche, but it really isn't in my experience. I think many people decide they want to do interdisciplinary projects because it's going to promote their professional standing, or it's going to supply funding or whatever. But I found that for the group to be a success, it has to be built on people who are really there to interact with others and to function as a team. And so I think they have to be interested in the collaborative enterprise and the different kind of scientific journey we go on, as Robin described, as an interdisciplinary group. So I have some more to say about that if I have time later on, because I do have some attributes that I think are really important in choosing team members that lead to success. But I'll stop right there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. And I do intend to get back to that with one of my questions in a short while here. So for the next half hour or so, I'm going to moderate a question and answer session among our panelists. During that time, I definitely invite those of you who are joining us today to submit questions via the chat, and Linda's going to review those. And then after 11:30 passes by, we'll ask you to join us and ask your question to the panelists. So I'm going to start off with a pretty general question, and I'm going to direct it to Robin. And my question is, what does interdisciplinary mean to you and or grant agencies? And one of the reasons I'm asking this is because I was just serving on a review panel of interdisciplinary grants, and there was a wide range of what interdisciplinary meant to the different people submitting grants. And so I wanted to start with a general question to try to kind of define what interdisciplinary research means to you. So Robin, if you want to tackle that one first, and then Pedro and Barry, if you want to join in afterwards.
Yeah, no, sure. I guess there's a couple of things that come to mind when I think about how I would define that research. I think, like NSF, for instance, so thinking from a funding agency standpoint, often we'll set out very clear criteria of what that means along 2 dimensions. One, the type of how broad they want the disciplinary expertise to be on that team, right? So a lot of the projects that Jay mentioned, some of our success with NSF has been through programs where they say you must have someone who does engineering, you must have someone from geosciences, you must have someone from social behavioral or economic sciences. So they'll call out multiple directorates and really prescribe and say this team has to have at least one person from each of these kind of directorates, right, in terms of their disciplinary expertise, participating in this project. So there's that where, and I think we, even in the Sustainability Institute, we've gone back and forth thinking about how do you define an interdisciplinary team? Does it have to be multiple departments or multiple colleges? And I would say no, it has to be, people who are bringing different disciplinary expertise to solve a problem together. So I'm in the School of Environment and Natural Resources. We could form an interdisciplinary team within our school, right? Because we have ecologists, we have soil scientists, we have political scientists, we have behavioral scientists. So we could easily form a team like that. So I think it's more just thinking about, are you bringing a breadth of disciplinary expertise to a problem that needs that expertise to be solved? But I think it can be more nuanced perhaps than sometimes the funding agencies might prescribe it. So, an economist and a behavioral scientist working together is still doing interdisciplinary research, right? We're bringing different perspectives and trying to merge those perspectives in a way that helps us think differently about that problem. And I'm participating right now, for those that aren't familiar with, there's the National SocioEnvironmental Synthesis Center based out of University of Maryland. It's in Annapolis. I'm sure several folks have participated in projects there, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of what SI is now doing with the exploratory research groups that were presented and discussed earlier today. That it's an opportunity, it's a center that basically funds people from different disciplines to come together and think about problems together. So it doesn't fund new research. It doesn't specifically fund grant writing, but it funds diverse teams who they will fly to Annapolis. They'll put you up in a hotel and give you food. And you block out 3 days, multiple times a year over a couple of years to sit down and kind of work on problems together. And so I've been on 4 different projects there, but one I'm on right now, we have a team of sociologists, economists, and psychologists who are working together to try to develop a more comprehensive kind of conceptual model for how we think about private lands conservation. And the idea there is like, we're all social scientists, but it's still hard. It's still hard for us to sit there and think about how would an economist approach this problem? How would a sociologist approach this? How would a psychologist approach it? And how could we together approach it more holistically and actually make greater progress towards, improving private lands conservation? So I think there's multiple ways to define it from a disciplinary standpoint. And it's more about, are we challenging ourselves to step outside our box and think differently? And then I think the other thing that to me is consistent with how I define interdisciplinary or team science, that is again often laid out by the funding agency, is the degree to which it's integrated. So I feel pretty strongly that good team science is not a bunch of people from different disciplines doing work in parallel and then at the end saying, look at all these things we learned, right? But it's that group, and I think Pedro talked about some of this, it's that group getting together early and saying, what's the problem we're going to work on solving? How are we going to integrate our data and our methods? How are we going to have inputs and outputs from our work that feed into each other's work? How are we truly going to link all of this together so that we have kind of, a solution or an answer at the end, and not a lot of answers or a lot of solutions just coming again from our disciplinary perspectives. So I tend to think, when I have tried to work with new team members and I haven't found, and this might relate to Barry's comments about personality, when I haven't found people wanting to do that integration, I don't find that as useful or rewarding. So I'm not interested in working on interdisciplinary teams where I've been brought on just to do my thing. I want to sit down and think about how can we do our thing together. And I think the NSF has been pretty clear that that's something they value through a variety of their different programs, through their coupled systems modeling. And, there has to be feedbacks, there has to be integration, or it won't be funded. And that's often the hardest part. So I think those 2 pieces, I think, making sure you're bringing diverse disciplinary expertise, but also making sure that you're integrating that expertise and you're not just, again, working in parallel, because there's no real added value to that.
Thanks, Robin. I was really interested in the program you mentioned that takes place at Annapolis. Could you mention the name of that again? SESYNC, SESYNC, but it's the National Socio-Environmental Synthesis Center. I believe it's an NSF funded center through University of Maryland. And they've been around for, I want to say, at least 10 years. I don't know what their future is, but it's been a really cool opportunity where I've gotten to work with scientists and again, it's really kind of a think tank where you can, again, I think similar to what has inspired the exploratory research groups, is sometimes you don't need seed funding, you need time, and you need like logistical support to like sit down and come up with a question together, right? Or start to work through that kind of common language, common methods challenge. And that's a existing opportunity to do that at a national level. Thanks, Robin. And thanks to Jenny for posting the website on the chat for SESYNC too. Pedro or Barry, any additional comments about what interdisciplinarity or interdisciplinary research means to you?
Sure. So the first thing that comes to my mind is to think in systems as you act in your discipline, analogous to think globally as you act locally, so that you can have a higher impact. To me, it means agility for dynamic collaboration in an environment where there is less prescription, there are less boundaries, so you can have a much higher impact. And another word that comes to mind, it means convergence, along the lines that Robin said, that in a meaningful way. I think Bill also alluded to the importance of having the right personality and attitude to want to discover together and basically sort of joined by a common vision. You gotta agree on what the goals are overall, and how do you measure success early on, but eventually it really is, again, about being able to target grand challenges that are very complex and too difficult for a single discipline to address.
Thanks, Pedro. So it seems like it's really important to find the right people to serve on these teams as we move to convergence. So I wanted to go back to the point that Barry left off on during his introduction about how do you find the right folks, or what are some key attitude and personality traits of people that serve on these teams? So Barry, you want to add a little bit to that?
Sure, I will try, Jay. Again, I've put a little list together. I think they're pretty obvious, but I'll go through them because, as I mentioned, I polled my former team, and they've come up with some of these. I think, as Robin and now Pedro's have just stated, is that you some sort of pleasure and enjoyment out of working together, working as a team, and people I think maybe develop that early on in their lives, or maybe not. But I think the knowledge that as you go into it, working with a group that's interdisciplinary, is that you have to be a bit unselfish. You have to be a bit of a cheerleader for others. You have to desire to want to function together as a productive team and celebrate successes of the group as a whole, rather than maybe individual successes, as Robin alluded to when she talked about people kind of working together, but they're all doing their own thing. I think one of the other ideas that came from our group of people was having a sense of humor, being able to kind of laugh at yourself, and again, understand that there are going to be ups and downs, and there are going to be successes, but there's also going to be failures at times, and being able to perhaps not take yourself too seriously is a positive trait as well. I think leadership, as Pedro alluded to, having good leadership and understanding the personalities of your team and how they fit together is important. We found that having diversity, not just gender diversity, but age diversity, was a real positive, and getting productivity from everyone, and good mentoring as well. I'm looking at my list here. I think one of the things we had going for us, because we were working in the Antarctic, was we got to spend time together in a remote location. We all came from different institutions, and yet we knew there was going to be a field work component where most of us would be together and interact. And I think we got to know each other quite well. And we also, and when I say know each other, not just from a personal point of view, but also from an intellectual point of view, how people thought, how they attack problems. So that closeness of interaction, I think, weeded some people out and left some people behind. So I think that was a key issue too. But I think trust and respect, and the understanding that you're in this team for a reason, that there are other people who know more about certain aspects of the work you're doing than you do, and a time to speak and a time to listen, I think are important attributes as well.
Thanks, Barry. I definitely appreciate your comment about being able to laugh at yourself and having humor. I think it's important to be able to know what you don't know. So working with people outside your discipline, you're going to learn new things, and to learn new things, you have to not know those things initially, and be humble and be willing to say, what are you talking about? Can you explain that to me? And sometimes I know that I've asked people to do that multiple times. Probably asked Robin to do it a few times with the same question, but thanks to her for being patient, we have learned to work together and communicate, and I've learned a lot from that. So yeah, that's really important, to be humble and being able to laugh at yourself and be open to learning new things as you work on interdisciplinary teams.
Yeah, if I can just add to your comment, Jay, and I'll be quick. We have a person in our group who studies invertebrates and soils, and he's a really good genetics person, outstanding. And of course, anybody who's worked with people who do genetics or genomics know that they speak a special language that us mere mortals don't necessarily understand. And when we went into the field every year, I would ask him to give an hour tutorial to all the students that were the physical scientists and others, so that the students and the rest of us who didn't do genetics knew what the lingo was. And so those are the kinds of opportunities I think that interdisciplinary science produces, particularly for young people. And just to add on to what you just said about you and Robin interacting. So thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Barry. I'd like to change to a different line. It's clear that from what Robin said earlier, that there are definitely costs, and it's really hard to pursue these interdisciplinary projects, and it takes extra time, and you have to find the right people. So the question that I'm going to direct to Pedro is, why do you pursue interdisciplinary projects? We know that this takes a lot of time and they're hard. So why do we do it? What are the benefits, Pedro?
Well, I think the first one is higher impact. Einstein, I guess, used to say that the most intellectually stimulating and most technologically productive research occurs at the interstices between disciplines. And that is very true, and higher impact comes with a bigger pie as well. So it is nice. It allows you to sometimes establish a platform for sustained collaboration where you can direct your intellectual energies to do research and advance something good, as opposed to be chasing grants and chasing your tail that essentially, takes up a lot of energy also. But I believe that I like the idea that when you do interdisciplinary collaboration, you get access to new talent, sometimes to new test beds, new methods, new technologies, and in a certain way to greater workforce development opportunities, because one of the most important things we do, remember, is to pass the torch, to develop a workforce that is globally competitive. And if they are dynamic collaborators, they're going to be better at that. And for the public also, I think that this accelerates the development of solutions to sustainable development challenges, and that results in greater public service and better social welfare as well. So let me stop there.
Robin or Barry, anything you'd like to add to that about why you pursue interdisciplinary research, even though it's very challenging and perhaps harder than disciplinary research?
Yeah, I would just add, I've already talked about some of the costs, and I go back and forth between maybe I should do something on my own for a while. But then I think the benefits I'd be missing out on is feeling like I'm actually solving a problem versus chipping away at it. So I think I've really bought into this idea that what I can bring will chip away at a problem, but it will not solve that problem because it's just one kind of piece of that puzzle. And so instead of, applying my perspective in a vacuum, the benefit of the team science is to feel like we're really comprehensively tackling some of these big challenges and hopefully coming away with more realistic, more informed potential solutions, because we're bringing the necessary expertise to that. And so to me, that's the real benefit, is I'm an applied problem solving sort of researcher. And so in order to do that well, I feel like you've got to work on these teams. And so that to me is the biggest motivation or the biggest driver.
Yeah, that's a great point, Robin. And I'll just pull an example from some of the projects you and I've worked on. I think that if I was working by myself on practices that could limit nutrients running off from ag fields getting into Lake Erie, maybe I could find out which practices are the most important from an engineering or ecological standpoint. And you working by yourself could maybe find out which practices are more important from a farmer decision-making perspective. But if we work together, then we can have more holistic answers that address both the water need and the farmers' needs, and can actually have a practice that's more likely to be adopted and to make an impact. So that's a great point. I just wanted to add an example that I've learned by working with you. Barry, anything you want to add to that about why you pursue interdisciplinary research?
Yeah, I'll just add one quick note. I think from an individual point of view, I've found in my experience that I bring a tool set to the table, and the problems that I end up working on in these interdisciplinary teams are things that I wouldn't have thought about by myself, very much like what Pedro and Robin and you have said. And so it drives my my curiosity, in a whole different direction. So I think there's personal gain in terms of development as a scientist, in my case, in helping learn about other people's what they perceive as problems and how you can help them. So I think there's some besides solving the problem, there's some intellectual development gained by thinking about things in a different way that you hadn't thought about before.
Thanks, Barry. I see that there's a number of graduate students joining us today. So I'm going to ask a question geared towards kind of academic training. So the three of you are obviously interested in interdisciplinary work. Is this something that came out of your graduate school or undergrad work, or is this something that you developed during your faculty career? And do you have guidance for graduate students who want to pursue interdisciplinary work in the future? And that can be open to anyone who'd like to respond.
I could jump in because I already kind of told the story that I think like systems thinking was kind of part of my motivation from day one from an educational standpoint, and then was really embedded in a lot of my educational work. So my advice to graduate students, I think, is that if that's something you're really passionate about, find the programs that allow you to engage in some of that systems thinking, but make sure you still get your disciplinary expertise. Because I know in SCNR, we've gone back and forth over the years of like, how do you train? We're an interdisciplinary school. A lot of us do very interdisciplinary work. What's our, what's our goal in training graduate students? And we've kind of settled on this space where, our goal is still to develop scientists who have deep disciplinary expertise in whatever it is they're there to do, but they need exposure to some degree to these broader ways of thinking, to maybe taking a class in coupled systems or participating with their peer grad students from other perspectives, so they get exposed to those ideas, so they start to develop that broader understanding, that appreciation of systems thinking, that comfort with different languages, while still getting that depth, so that moving forward, hopefully they can do both, right? The goal is to be able to still make that impact in your discipline, but have the ability and the comfort and the kind of right skill set to work on those teams as well.
I would advise the student to try to be like T-shaped, in the sense that you have to develop your core disciplinary depth, that where you really are good at, but be aware also what else is going on around. If you are only about depth, you're going to be like an eye. It's very difficult to have an impact without correlating to other disciplines and moving to those interstices, right? And if you're like just flat only about breadth, then you're expendable. You're really not going to have anything unique and distinctive to offer. But also socialization is very important. My disciplinary training was very reductionist. I mean, it was mainly microbiology. And it was through playing soccer that I met a lot of different people with diverse interests that I started getting curious. And Plato, I guess the Greek philosopher, used to say that you can learn a lot more about a person by playing with them for 1 hour than talking to them for a year, right? And that is so true. So I think that this idea of being in situations where you have to play hard and and also traveling a lot is for me, it was a big incentive to do multidisciplinary work. I think it's very important as a student to see and to be seen. Whenever you go to a conference, be curious, enjoy this intellectual freedom that you have right now, where you can pursue different things and ask questions and shake hands and so on. And I think that will open a lot of doors and opportunities for interdisciplinary collaborations.
Yeah, Jay, if I could just make an observation to relate to your question, and that is, as our project in Antarctica aged, like with the old PIs, we had former students and postdocs that got more and more involved and became PIs in the program. And one of the things that I noticed is, unlike the original group that took, as Robin pointed out, maybe 4 years really to start functioning intellectually on the same plane, these students who have evolved into professional scientists didn't have that time lag. They were trained in a fashion where they could leap in and they knew what the game plan was, essentially. So I think being trained in these kinds of interdisciplinary groups, and I agree with both Pedro and Robin that having that disciplinary background is really important, but being thrown into a well-functioning and successful interdisciplinary team as part of the training really aids in the development of this kind of systems thinking that's really important.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to ask one more question before we open up to audience questions. So we are getting close to the bottom of the hour, so maybe some quicker, more concise responses here. We've talked a lot about how good it is to do interdisciplinary work. This question is, where do things go wrong when you're pursuing interdisciplinary research, or what are some bigger challenges as you've gone down this road before? Barry, you want to go ahead and kick that one off?
Can you guys hear me? Okay. That's a good question. And I guess I would relate back to a couple things I've already said. One is, I think, getting the right team together, both from an intellectual point of view, as Pedro pointed out, and from a personality point of view, as I pointed out, is really important. And again, not having the right team is not going to make you successful, either from an intellectual point of view or from a team perspective. I think that's an issue. I think the other thing that I've seen happen is what a program manager used to tell me is called mission creep, where the group was set up to solve a particular problem and focus on the answer to a series of questions or test hypotheses, and they kind of go off in another direction and lose track of what they were trying to do. But clearly that has some intellectual benefit, but it doesn't get essentially the job done in terms of what the original project was all about. So I think those are two things that I would acknowledge anyway.
Thanks, Barry. Pedro, do you want to add something about where things go wrong with interdisciplinary research?
A lot of it is related to unsynchronized expectations, whether it is like, what order should the authorship be when you have, how much money am I going to get, who's going to do what, and who dropped the ball. And a lot of things can be basically, I think, resolved through effective communication. Essentially, it is important to ensure 5 things to make sure that things go well. And this is the textbook thing, right? First, you got to have a common agenda, including a shared vision that I mentioned earlier, that includes a common understanding of the problem and the joint approach for solving it through mutually agreed upon actions at the beginning. 2, you gotta have shared measurements, referring to agreement in the way that success, for example, will be measured and reported. 3, you gotta have mutually reinforcing activities that enhance engagement, including frequent social fun. And 4, continuous communication that enhances trust. Trust is so key here, and that facilitates incidental synergies, having architectural unification, for example, where you can go for coffee at the same place and just run into each other is important. And finally, you need a backbone organization, including staff, with a specific set of skills that potentiates the entire initiative. Let me stop there.
Robin?
Yeah, I'd add 2 quick things. You have to have a good project management plan. So I was just thinking of like a lot of my team science projects, and we're meeting at least monthly, if not weekly, for one of the projects. And I think that's very different from, you know, when you're not working with such an integrated team. But like if you don't have that good project management plan in place, which is in line a bit with what Pedro was saying, I think things can go wrong. So you need to meet often. You need to have those opportunities to all be on the same page, work through problems together. And then I thought of one very specific example where things went catastrophically wrong. And it was when I was leading the second iteration of a proposal that ended up getting funded on the 3rd try. And it was an NSF proposal, and we submitted it. And I made that comment earlier about how granting agencies may define interdisciplinary in a very specific way. You need a person from each of these different perspectives. And the feedback we got from that proposal was, best social scientist of all the proposals, but you don't have an engineer. And we would have politely disagreed with whether or not we had an engineer because Jay was on the team, but the way that we were conceptualizing the different disciplinary pieces did not come across the way that they were looking for engineering, I guess. And so the lesson learned there was, you know, communicate early with the program officers and the folks running those programs to make sure that how you're envisioning responding to that call is consistent with what they're looking for.
Okay, thank you for that response. I'm going to hand things over to Linda now and ask her to moderate questions from the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. And to the panelists, thanks. This has been really, really exciting, really interesting for me to kind of hear all of your advice and things. We've got a couple of questions in the panel, and then maybe I'll have a chance to ask one as well. So the first question that we have is from Alec Grimm. Alec, do you want to unmute and ask your question directly?
Yeah, sure. My question involved basically what are the challenges and differences from forming an interdisciplinary team, say within your department, like as Robin mentioned, you could do that within, say, SCNR, or between different departments or universities. Is one more kind of common than the other? That's what I wanted to find out, I guess.
And Alec, could you just say kind of whether you're a faculty member and what kind of disciplinary area you're in?
I'm actually a graduate student in the Department of Food, Agricultural, and Biological Engineering at Ohio State.
Yeah.
Thanks, Robin. Go ahead.
Can we just jump in? I would jump in and say that in theory, it should be easier to form a team when you're within a department, right? Because part of what the challenges of forming good teams is just having the time and the ability to meet regularly, or the comment was made about running into each other casually. And so OSU is so big that sometimes making those connections with people from other departments is more challenging. You're just not sharing space, you're not crossing paths. But interestingly, almost all the teams I work on, I'm one of the few SCNR people. So a lot of the teams that I found success with are across departments and colleges. So I think both can work. I think that the challenge of kind of across departments or colleges is just that kind of the reality of finding the time to meet. You know, if I have to travel across campus, that's extra time on top of the meeting. And so that sometimes can be a barrier that you have to figure out ways to overcome.
Thank you.
Barry or Pedro, do you have any comments you'd like to add to that question?
Just that it depends on the institutional culture. For example, at Rice, we're very small and we cannot afford to have the critical mass that you guys have. And that means I often have to go not only outside of my department, but outside of the university to find collaborators. So that's fun, you know.
Mhm. Well, the culture just made me think that for years, the behavioral scientists that are in the School of Environmental Natural Resources have tried to build bridges with some really excellent researchers in our psychology department at OSU. And though we share we like each other, we tried to develop social gatherings where we can informally get to know each other and understand what we do. One of the big challenges of working together has been very different cultures, where what they're rewarded for in psychology is not what we're rewarded for in SCNR. And so figuring out how can we work together, at what stage can we work together, how can we dream up a proposal where everyone gets what they need out of it, that's been a real challenge. And that has nothing to do specifically with their department or our unit, but it's more just a function of what are the cultures where people are placed and what are they rewarded for. And I think that almost becomes the bigger issue, which is again why if you're in an interdisciplinary unit, it might be easier because you're all in the same place and you have the same reward system. And so in that way, that can be a little easier to navigate.
Gary, do you have anything to add?
Well, I was just going to follow up briefly on what Pedro said. As I think I mentioned in one of the points I made, our group was maybe 9 or 10 PIs, depending on the time, from anywhere from 7 to 8 institutions. And so we were spread out all over the United States. And so there had to be a real concerted effort when we had a meeting planned, like Robin said, whether it was a telecom or whether it was a science meeting once a year or whatever, that everyone prepared for it properly and participated. So it took some time and a lot of effort to keep the group together on functioning on the same page.
But did you get some of that atmosphere when you were in Antarctica together because you were there for longer periods?
Yes, there were times when not everyone was in the field at the same time, but when the group was together, there was that synergy and that extra added spark and that enabled the building of the camaraderie and everything else that goes with a well-functioning team. So yes.
I'm going to ask Pedro kind of a follow-on question, because I know you spent a number of years at the University of Iowa, and now being at Rice, that's much smaller. And I did my graduate work at Caltech, which was small, and now I'm at Ohio State, which is gigantic. Do you think it's easier or harder to do interdisciplinary work at Rice? And what do you see as maybe some of those differences compared to Iowa?
Yeah, I think that Rice is a little easier because of we have no choice but to basically lower, silos and walls, and we have to collaborate to survive. Rice started out with a boutique culture where they decided, okay, we're only going to do a few things and try to do really well at them. And for example, I'm in civil engineering, and guess what? We don't do any construction project management. We don't do geotechnical. We don't do all kinds of things that you would say, what? So what do you do? Well, we have these niches: nanotechnology for water treatment, structural health monitoring. But in both cases, what is important, one thing I want to get out here, right? If I may have 2 minutes, right? It's very important to develop a value proposition that uses the NABC approach. And I'll just tell you a little bit about what that means. So the N stands for need. And what I mean by that is that you need to have and identify a clear need rather than to try to find a problem for your solution. Because we come from a culture of discovery where you suddenly find a hammer and you say, okay, let me see what I can hit with. And often those things dissipate very quickly and have very little impact because you're forcing your solution on problems. And the second thing is the approach. I think this is where you have to be distinctive. If you're a scientist, use hypotheses if you can, right? And of course, based on sound principles. The B refers to make sure that whatever you're proposing, the benefits will exceed the cost. And what I'm talking about here is that doing some early techno-economic analysis is very important to make sure that you are, again, working on the correct side of the decimal point. And finally, the C stands for competition and competing. And this is something I never did as a junior faculty, which is, even when I write a paper for ES&T, one of the most common reasons why I reject papers is because they don't benchmark whatever they're proposing using appropriate metric against competing technologies or against competing hypotheses, right? So that C is very important. What I just told you is not mine, it's the idea that was put forward by Kurt Carlson, who was the CEO of the Stanford Research Institute for many years, and he was responsible for innovating Siri for high definition television, Google cars, many high impact innovations using this very simple, intuitive approach. So anyways, I would encourage you, whether you are at a large state university or a small private school, use a value creation approach, such as an ABC, that kind of helps you focus better on high impact endeavors.
That's great advice. I'm going to go back to the chat for another question that we have. And Samantha Francis, you have a question in the chat. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask it? But also I'd ask you at the beginning to kind of say, you know, what your role is at the university and what department you're in.
Oh, sure. I work with Jay. I'm one of his grad students on the NIFA project. And I analyze kind of the efficacy of edge of field best management practices that are treating runoff from agricultural fields. So my question is, let's say that you've assembled your expert interdisciplinary team. You all work well together, you've gotten your funding, and you've completed the research. Are there steps that you take with this complex information to ensure that what you've learned is now applied to the socioeconomy? How do you advocate for your research to see changes on the ground?
I'll jump in. I'm a jumper. I would take a step back and say, I know you laid out kind of, you've completed your research, now what, but a strategy we've kind of become a requirement, I guess, of a lot of our team science projects is to have a stakeholder advisory team that we develop and are part of the project. They might even be helping us, you know, kind of define the problem more narrowly than we might have initially. So really carefully engaging stakeholders who are out there implementing policy, making decisions, who will use the science to make sure that the science we develop is actually useful. So I think you got to go back and make sure that you're bringing those voices into that conversation early to help guide your process, to make sure you don't just, you know, a bunch of scientists sitting over here disconnected from reality, coming out with something you think is going to be helpful, but it's not. And then I think once you've gotten to the end, and, you know, we also will build in workshops and other forms of dissemination and outreach. And I have a project where, you know, a communications professional from the Bird, Polar, and Climate Research Center is on the team, and he's developing infographics. So really thinking about the translation of those results at the end, whether that's through innovative products, you know, publishing thought pieces and policy journals, but, you know, like really thinking strategically about when we are done, how are we going to make sure this gets out there to the right people? So I think you have to think both about that kind of the process of doing the science and bringing that stakeholder input in, but then also strategically the translational piece at the end, and how are you going to get it out there?
Yeah, I fully agree. Part of it is understanding from the beginning who is willing to pull what you're trying to push. And as you build this innovation ecosystem, keep in mind that there are best practices already out there that you can look at. Like, for example, how do you build an engineering research center? You have an industrial practitioner advisory board that since the beginning, since you are inventing or discovering things, they're telling you what's important to them and what they're willing to run with once you pass the ball to them, right? And the same thing, as Robin said, you want to have a scientific advisory board, but the final part of this that is very important is scientific communication. How do you talk to the general public and convince people? And for that, sometimes, at least I never got any training formally in university as a student. I had to learn that through the Leopold Leadership Foundation. But there are opportunities out there. There are NGOs and organizations that specialize on teaching you how to speak to Congress, on how to speak to the media, and so on. So all that is important.
Yeah, the workshop that we hosted in January with the Sustainability Institute was AAAS run, and they have a series of workshops. Barry, did you have anything to add to that question? Okay. I'm going to ask another question, and so I got pulled into writing a pre-proposal for an NSF STC a few years ago, and we talked to a few center directors when we were gearing up to do that, and I heard more than once saying, "You don't want to do this. My personal research program took a serious hit. You know, it's really a heavy lift." So so Pedro, as you're running one of these, what's your response to that? You still have some hair, so you haven't pulled it all out.
It is indeed a mixed blessing. You know, when you get one of these centers, you should congratulate and give your condolences at the same time. Because, but I mean, overall, it is rewarding. I think. Yes, personally, my lab is smaller now. I cannot afford to support as many students as I used to before, because a lot of the money that comes in, you end up giving it away. And when you write up an individual grant, people say, "No, I don't give the money to that person. He has too much money already," right? They have this idea. So it has hurt in a certain time, but it came at a stage in my career where I did want to do some managing of intellectual capital. And I think that overall, you become more of a facilitator and an enabler, which is also fun. But you're right. I mean, you got to do this at the right stage in your career, and understand how this would align your passion with your vocation, what you love with what you're good at.
Anybody else have kind of any comments related to kind of your personal research program, which might be just, you know, kind of more single investigator, you know, single collaborator versus these really large things, and how hard it is on the research program?
I think Pedro's comment about the stage of your career resonated with me because, you know, and your personality and what appeals to you, right? Like there may be a point in time where you find that extremely rewarding to take a step back and to not be pursuing kind of your own research career, but facilitating the careers of others or achieving these kind of, you know, team science goals. And I think that's great. And we need people willing to do that, but you're not going to do that pre-tenure, right? You're going to do that maybe as a full professor when you're ready for a new challenge. Because I feel like I'm kind of at that point in my life where I'm like, what do I want to do for the next 10 years? You know, maybe I want to do something different. Like maybe I don't want to just keep running after kind of my space. Like, you know, so I think a lot of us get to a point where, you know, we're asking that question. And if that's something that appeals to you, great. But I think it's a function of personality and when's the right time to do it.
Barry, did you want to add to that?
I don't think I can add anything else. That I think the key issue is that it's very time consuming, as you made note of in your question, and I think both Robin and Pedro responded to that, and I agreed. I think it's right for some people, but it's not right for others. I think we in academia tend to appoint people to management roles who really may not be very good at management, and so having the ability and the desire to take on those responsibilities, I think, can be really rewarding, but it's going to consume you if you're doing it well.
We're close to the end of our time. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I'm going to ask one more because maybe we don't want to end on kind of maybe a little bit more of a negative note. But kind of going back to the beginning, and how do you start? And I'm going to say this because I want to help spur teams to start at OSU a little bit. Is you talked, Robin, you mentioned in the beginning is that it's not just about a bunch of investigators on a grant and they're each doing their parallel things and they kind of are all on the same theme. But you really need to have that integration to really have that good impact. So how do you do that? Do you have postdocs that are maybe, you know, 1 foot in a couple of different labs? How do you do that? Or you still have individual graduate students in an individual lab and integrate at the end? What are some of the ways and the ideas to do that good integration?
for me, it was, you had a very clear objective that you couldn't accomplish, and you needed another person to measure something for you or to model something for you. And then you will go to that person and say, hey, can you do this, and so on. And then you would have a higher impact paper. And but the way to start is by dreaming, I think. You got to dream, and hopefully make that dream a reality eventually with patience. What is it that Einstein used to say, that genius is 100%, 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration? So you got to work hard at it, but the payoff is worth it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the teams I've been on have kind of constantly struggled with that question about the graduate students, and how do we make sure that they're all communicating and kind of working together as well. But I think the kind of methods we've taken on that have been useful for us is using simulation modeling as the integrator. So kind of similar to what Pedro was saying, where, we have simulation models. So for instance, we have an economist who does integrated assessment modeling, but that integrated assessment modeling doesn't cover everything. And so we're thinking about ways to input other data and other pieces into the way that modeling is done, so that it is a more comprehensive, maybe more accurate forecast of what the future would look like, by bringing in behavioral heterogeneity, or bringing in, the modeling work that Jay does, thinking about water quality impacts from land use and land management decisions. So trying to broaden, take tools that exist that are about integration, but try to broaden the way those tools are built and the way those models are run in order to represent a system more holistically. So that has been a strategy that I think's worked well. But I think you could think about it in smaller ways too. Like Jay gave the example of, his work might identify what management practices are kind of best from an engineering standpoint or ecological standpoint. My work might recognize what's best from a behavioral standpoint or motivational standpoint. But often what we rely on from a policy standpoint is just the watershed modeling side, or the economic perspective, where we develop cost curves that say, the cheapest way to get the best return is to invest in these 5 practices first, and then the further we go, these get more expensive, right? And so we don't really want to invest in those till later. But I've talked about the idea of behavioral cost curves, who are the cheapest people that we can invest in, and then who are the expensive ones. And so could we overlay those 2 perspectives and have a different sort of cost curve that takes both into perspective the economic costs of the physical practice, but also the behavioral costs of getting people to do them. And by overlaying that, can we then have a more nuanced, more accurate understanding of what's going to work? So I think you could even think about simpler things like that, where, you might each come up with different answers, but if you put them together, you get a new answer that is more effective.
Barry, do you have any tips?
Well, I would just, again, I think both Robin and Pedro have done a good job of answering the question. I think the way we did it was mostly through modeling as well. And there were times, I think, when we had a couple of different data sets generated by different folks, and we might find money for a postdoc to bring the postdoc in to try to integrate and synthesize that information together. So give them a specific job to do a very specific thing that needed to be done in order to move forward. So I think those are the kinds of things that we did.
Well, thank all 3 of you for a really fabulous panel. I learned a lot today. I'm sure the rest of the people that have been listening in have learned a tremendous amount as well. These things aren't easy to do. There's lots of things that you have to overlay, but I think I learned that curiosity and kind of the interest for having bigger impact are some really important components in doing this work and thinking about doing this work. So as we conclude today, I put early on in the chat, so you can scroll back through the chat, some things that I wanted to highlight. And if you are inspired to get more involved, or you really wanted to get involved and don't know how, some things that you can do here on campus. And so a couple of things I put in the chat. One is on Thursday, Jay and I are going to be hosting a Flow and Terroir, as he mentioned, as he started off things this morning. And that's going to be at 4:30 on Thursday, which is April 1st. So it's not a joke. It's really going to happen. You can bring a beverage if you want. The Zoom link is in the chat along with the meeting ID and password if you'd like to attend. So what we're going to be doing is talking about some upcoming grants and listening to you all and people's ideas, and maybe we can help develop some teams and connect people up that might have common interests. The other thing that Alina Irwin mentioned early on is that there is a call for exploratory research groups through the Sustainability Institute. And that is another, I didn't put that in the chat, I meant to. That is happening as well. You can find that on the Sustainability Institute website. We're looking for a call for ideas right now. And so please look for those. It's a great way to do that early work and developing that team and having some of that time to get together and to talk and to start to learn each other's languages. So those are going to be really fabulous opportunities you should look out for. So thank everybody. Thank you for coming today and participating. And I look forward to working with you all as you develop some ideas. And I just see that we see the Sustainability Institute, the ERG opportunity showed up in the chat. So thanks to Kathy for that. And again, a last thank you to Pedro Alvarez for coming in from Rice University for us to taking time to talk to us about his knowledge. Also to Barry Lyons from Earth Science here at OSU for talking to us about his experience on interdisciplinary work, and to Robin Wilson from the School of Environment and Natural Resources here at Ohio State for participating as well. So thank you all very much, really appreciate it.